Many engineers are not good technical writers. But if you were to ask me what is the number one skill you should be working on now to prepare to become a great engineer, technical writing would be one of the first things that would come to mind. It's a skill that takes practice, and it's a skill that needs to be learned. And in today's episode, we're going to discuss how you can make your technical writing clear, concise, and organized, and why that's important. My name is Josh, and this is Engineering a Better Education. So what do I mean when I say technical writing? I mean research writing, I mean scientific writing. I'm talking about writing where the purpose is to share information that was obtained using the scientific method. Or I'm talking about writing where the purpose is to persuade somebody of a claim or to defend a claim using logical reasoning or evidence that was obtained, once again, using the scientific method. Those are kind of like the two types of writing that you do as an engineer. One is just to convey information, scientific information, logical information. The other one is to defend a claim, or in other words, write a technical justification for some action that you'd like to take or that you have taken and you want to justify it. So technical writing varies from other types of writing in the sense that you're not necessarily trying to entertain your audience. You're not necessarily trying to evoke strong emotions in your audience or in your readers. You want it to be, as I mentioned at the beginning, clear, concise, and organized. That's the key. You don't want people to be confused when they're reading what you've written. And I mentioned at the beginning that many engineers are not good technical writers. And how do I know this? It's because I work as a quality engineer and I read and review a lot of things that other engineers have written. And we'll get into this a little bit later and I'll give some examples, but it's missing those three elements that I talked about. Sometimes I read something and it's not clear at all what they're talking about. It's not concise. It can get really long and rambly, and it's not organized. I can't find the information that I want to find where I would expect it to be. So let's jump right in. What does it mean for your writing to be clear, and how can you achieve that? I think the most important thing you can do to make your writing clear is to understand and know your audience. This should be a conscious decision that you make when you're writing. You need to think, who is going to read this, and what prior knowledge do they have? What assumptions can I make about their prior knowledge? That's really important. So one of the safest things that you can do is what I call casting a wide net and then filtering down. So let's say you were writing a research article about quantum computing. The people who are going to read it are likely going to be familiar with quantum computing. Maybe you're a PhD student doing your research in quantum computing, but it's always good practice to still cast a wide net at the beginning. And I think one of the first sentences in your background section should define what is quantum computing and cast that really wide net. So you could say something like, quantum computing is the practice of performing calculations or computations using quantum elements. Then maybe you could define what is a quantum element, such as by saying quantum elements such as photons, or I did not do a PhD in quantum computing, so I won't go too much into detail. But essentially, you're casting that really wide net at the beginning, something that you could safely assume your audience already knows. But just to be safe, you're going to cover it and cast that wide net. And then you're going to filter down to the very specific thing that you want to talk about. Maybe you want to talk about a particular algorithm within quantum computing. So you cast that wide net. What is quantum computing? What is a quantum particle? What is this algorithm that we're going to be talking about in this paper? And once again, as we mentioned, this should be concise. You don't spend a lot of time on this. You're just one sentence after another, narrowing down to what you're going to talk about. And this leads into my second point, which is after you know your audience, you need to make it clear up front what your main point is. That's a key to clarity. And I call this show the forest before you talk about the trees. A lot of people dive straight into the details. They might lead out, if we're going with this quantum computing example, they might lead out with the details of this algorithm that you're going to talk about or that you've discovered. But you need to zoom out, give a high-level overview. When I say high level, I'm talking that zoomed out view. You're going to zoom out, show the whole forest before you get into the low-level details, which are those zoomed in. What do the trees look like? What does the bark look like on the trees? If you start too zoomed in, people have no idea what you're talking about. They don't know where you are in the world of science or knowledge. So at the very beginning, you need to give a clear main point sentence. So if it's the beginning of your paper or your article, you need to give a clear main point about what this whole paper or article is going to be about. And then lead every section and every paragraph with a clear sentence that explains what is the next thing that I'm going to talk about. There's an analogy that I like to think of that explains how to teach something well and how people learn. It's kind of like building something in Minecraft. Minecraft is a video game where you can build structures and worlds using these three-dimensional blocks. And in Minecraft, you always have to connect a block to an existing block. You can't just drop a block in the middle of space. And so if you want to build something up in the sky, you need to start on the ground and build upwards. And that's how it works when you're teaching people something new. You need to start at the ground, meet them where they're at, and build up from there. So the safest way to do that, like I said, is casting a wide net, a large net. Meet them on the ground where they're at, and then you can build up quickly from there and get into the details. Start talking about the trees within the forest. And this applies to explaining many things in life. If you want to get good at explaining board games or card games, always lead with your first statement on how you win the game. I really enjoy explaining card games and board games to people, and the first thing I always say is, the way you win this game is blank. And that's because the one safe assumption that you can make about everyone who's playing a game is that they want to know how to win. If you lead with, the way you win this game is by getting the highest number of points, well, then naturally the next question that people have is, well, how do I get points? And that's why you explain, the way that you get points is by laying down these matching sets of cards. And then naturally the next question is, well, how do I get a matching set of cards? Well, you can discard a card during your turn, and you can pick up a card from here or there, and people will automatically start devising strategies for the card game, and it's going to make a lot of sense and be very clear when you're explaining it. Too many people lead out with the little minutia and the strategies. I've listened to people explain games before, and they start with, well, you're going to have 8 cards in your hand, and there are these pyramid cards that allow you to skip a turn, and this and that, and people are confused because they don't know the very first thing, which is, how do I even win this game? So that's just a little tip there. If you're into board games and card games, always lead with, the way you win this game is blank, and then work backwards from there, because naturally questions will follow. And the same thing applies with your technical writing. Start with the thing people care about, the common knowledge that all of your readers are going to have, that common assumption. And the common assumption is that they're reading your paper or your article for a reason. There's some piece of information that they want. And so figure out what that is. And if you can't write one clear sentence about the main point of your paragraph, your section, your paper, then you probably don't know what that section is actually about. You probably don't know what you're actually trying to say, which is really common, and it doesn't mean that you're dumb or anything, because a lot of times when you start writing, it's not actually obvious what you're trying to say. Sometimes you just need a little bit of a blank slate to get your thoughts gathered. But once you figure out what you're really trying to say, then go back and revise that first sentence. Make it as easy as possible for the reader to understand what you're really trying to say. And this takes a lot of practice, and you're not going to get it right on your first try. So my number one advice for writing is to go back and read what you've written. I learned this. I had a great 6th grade teacher, and she loved writing, and we wrote a lot in her class. We did a book report every single week, which was kind of painful at the time, but I learned a lot looking back, and it was a lot of fun. But always go back and read what you've written, or have somebody else read it. And fortunately, in the field of engineering, oftentimes it's required for other engineers to read your work and review it, which is what I do a lot of times as a quality engineer. But if you want it to be good, read it again and revise it. You're not going to get it right the first time. And if you want a great opportunity to get some practice, this is where I want to tell you about my coaching program that is called Design a Product People Want. And in my coaching program, I take students who are teenage, high school age, who are interested in becoming an engineer, who love STEM, and who want to design a product that people want and become a real engineer without waiting until after college. I will walk you through my step-by-step process for successfully designing a product, and you'll get coaching calls with me where I will be able to help you not get stuck along the way. You can bring your questions to me, and I will help you keep moving every single week, making progress toward that end goal of designing a product. We go through a simple process of identifying a problem that you're passionate about solving, innovating a solution to that program, iterating prototypes along the way until you get a working solution, and then finally gaining the confidence to share or sell your work and implementing it into a business. If that's something that you're interested in, check out the link in the description below. You'll be able to book a call with me where you can learn more about my coaching program, what it is, and if it would be a good fit for you. So check out that link if you're interested in learning more. Let's move on to the second point. We just talked about what it means for your writing to be clear. Now let's talk about conciseness. I want to start by sharing a story. It's kind of a funny one, maybe. When I was in junior high, I grew up in Utah, and I went to the public education system in Utah, and they had this system called Utah Write. And at the time, this was maybe one of the first AI grading algorithms that probably we had seen. And the way it would work is we would go into the computer lab, sit down, and we'd get a prompt that we were supposed to write about. And the teacher would give us 30 minutes or something like that, and we would write up this essay in the computer lab, and then we would submit it, and it would automatically and pretty much instantly grade our paper and give us a score from 1 to 5 in 6 different categories. The categories were punctuation and grammar, organization. I don't even remember what they all were, but 5 was the highest score you could get. And so if you got a 5 on everything, you would get a perfect 30 out of 30. And otherwise it would tell you where you fell short and then highlight some sections of your writing that you could work on. Sounds great, right? And I think a lot of the teachers thought the same thing. This is awesome. We don't have to grade the writing. And I don't blame them. I wouldn't have wanted to write 30 plus papers. And in a way, it was a great opportunity for us to practice writing. But the funny thing that we all started to learn is that the algorithm favored long essays. And there was this funny thing where punctuation and grammar, it would highlight any grammatical mistakes or spelling mistakes. And you would think that if there were no flagged mistakes, that you would get a 5 out of 5. And what we found is you would only get a 4 out of 5 unless you had written beyond a certain length. And if you had written more words than some certain threshold, then you could get a 5 out of 5 if you didn't have any mistakes. And in fact, if you far surpassed that threshold, then you could have a few mistakes and still get a 5 out of 5. And that actually applied to almost all 6 categories. If you just wrote more and more and more and more, the algorithm would give you a higher score. I don't know how the algorithm worked, but that was a fatal flaw in the system. And so people started doing things someone that was in my class, he wrote his entire essay, and then he took a sentence that had nothing to do with his essay. It was kind of inappropriate, actually. And he wrote that sentence and then copied and pasted it over and over and just filled a ton of space. And I think he got a perfect 30 out of 30. So this is just kind of a funny example of what not to do. The Utah Write system was teaching us how to not be concise. We figured out that if we just wrote a ton of fluff and rambled on and on and on, that we would get a perfect score. And that is the exact opposite of what you should do in your technical writing. Do not ramble on, be concise. As we mentioned, state your main point, and then use the fewest number of words and the fewest sentences possible to support that point and explain it. One simple but common mistake that I see people make is they use redundant synonyms. For some reason, some of us learned in school to say things like, I'll give an example sentence, technical writing is difficult and challenging. And difficult and challenging mean the same thing. And your writing is actually stronger if you just pick one of those words. So if you ever catch yourself doing this, just pick one word and say something like, technical writing is challenging, and end it there. Never use redundant synonyms. It adds length and distracts your reader. That's just one simple example. But whenever you go back and read your writing again, look for areas where you can remove words, remove sentences, things that are redundant. You only need to say things once in technical writing because people can go back and reread a section if they're confused. They don't need that section repeated all throughout your article and paper. The best writers and the best public speakers know how to, public speakers specifically, tell a story, make a point, and put the mic down. We're now going to move on to organized. We covered clear, concise. Now we're on organized. Organization is really important in technical writing because most people are not going to read the entire thing that you wrote. A lot of times they just need one specific piece of information. And so if your writing is well organized, they'll be able to find that information. If it's not, they're going to get frustrated searching through everything that you've written, trying to find the one thing they want. So if you look at research articles, they often have large subtitles, such as background, method, results, analysis, conclusion. And so as a reader, you know, if you pull up one of these articles, sometimes they're really long, might be 20 plus pages of really dense material. And you want to know specifically how they set up their test or their experiment. So you would know, I should go to the method section, and that's going to explain to me the method that they use to collect their data. And if you go to the method section and there are a bunch of results baked in there or background things, you're going to get frustrated because you're there for one specific thing and there's a lot of extra information. Likewise, if they didn't actually write about their method in the method section, you're going to be frustrated because then you think, well, where did they write it? Is it in here at all? Do I need to go to the other sections? So it's really important when you have a subtitle or a specific piece of information that you're supposed to be writing about, that you only write about that piece of information. People will thank you later. It's going to make your article or paper a lot more referenced in the future. So if you're wanting people to refer to it and use it as a source of truth, people are going to reference it if they can find the specific information that they need within it. This is where I want to talk a little bit about what I see a lot of times at work as a quality engineer. I work on a manufacturing line, and it's in the medical device space. And in medical devices, you can't just go change something on your manufacturing line without putting together what's called a change package. In a change package, you explain what you're going to change, why you're going to change it, and why it's okay to change. And then that gets reviewed by several engineers, sometimes by a regulatory affairs person, and sometimes that even gets pushed to like the FDA, and they all read this change package and say whether it's okay to make the change or not. Like I said, you can't just walk down to your manufacturing floor. Let's say you have a packaging operation at the end of your medical device, and so you have a sealer, you seal a bag, and then it goes to get sterilized. You can't just walk in one day and be like, why don't we turn up the sealer today? I think that would be a good idea. And then all of a sudden you're burning through the seal on the bag. There's a hole in the bag. You take it to sterilization. It gets sterilized, but there's a hole in the bag. So bacteria is actually able to get into your medical device. It gets implanted into people. They get infections, get sick, and die. So you can't just do that. You need to show that you've thought through what you're going to change and that it's not going to present additional risks to the patient or the user. And this is good practice whether you're in medical device or not. So as I mentioned, in a change package, you state what you're going to change. And we call that a change description. We also explain why we're going to change it. That's called a change rationale. And the third thing, we explain why it's going to be okay to make this change. And we call that a technical justification. So in our system, when we write a change package, there's a section for change description, one for change rationale, and one for technical justification. And what I've found is that many engineers either don't understand the difference between those three things, or they aren't taking the time to separate what they're writing into those three categories. And it's not just engineers. We have technicians as well that will put together verbiage and write some of these change packages. And when I review them, a lot of times they're in the change. Interestingly, our system, it's change description and rationale is like within the same text field box, which I don't necessarily agree with, but I don't get a say in how that's formatted. So what I expect to see is a change description first and then a change rationale, because the description tells me like, oh, we're changing the temperature on our sealer, for example. And then the reason we're changing it is because, well, we've had some seals that have broken open, so we think the temperature's not hot enough to melt the plastic fully. That would be an example of a good change description and rationale. And a lot of times people like lead out with this huge background section that is leading into a rationale, and then at the very end they say like what they're going to change, or sometimes they don't even say what they're going to change. And I read that and I get confused because I'm like, what are we even talking about? This is an example of diving straight into the trees and the details, the low-level details, before you give that high-level overview, before you zoom out to show the forest. When I'm reading that, I get confused, and then sometimes I even have to open the specific document or procedure that they've edited, maybe the one that tells you what temperature to set your sealer at, and I see that they like crossed out the old temperature and wrote a higher one, and I'm like, oh, that's what we're doing. We're increasing the temperature of our sealer. But it didn't say that anywhere in the change description. And so that's when I need to give feedback to the person who wrote that and say, hey, can you lead out with this? We're changing the temperature of the sealer at the very beginning so that people know what we're talking about. So that's one example there. And then the other one that I think is even worse is there's the technical justification. And in this section, we're supposed to think about all the risks, like what's a risk with the temperature being too high? As I mentioned, you might melt the plastic and create a hole in the seal. And so a technical justification would say something like, we've sealed a bunch of bags. We've sealed this many bags at this higher temperature, and we found that 100% of them had a good seal. And if you compare that with the old temperature, only 98% of them or 90% of them were getting a good seal. Therefore, the new temperature is better. And you might reference a little technical document, technical summary that you wrote up that contains all the data you're talking about, but that's what belongs in there. And what I find people do is they'll actually just take that first text box, the change description and rationale, and they'll just copy and paste it into the technical justification, which is a problem because you shouldn't have even been writing a technical justification in that other box. You should have just been writing a summary or a description of your change along with the rationale. And yeah, it gets really messy. A lot of times I cannot find the information that I'm looking for. The technical justification might be in the description, and the description might be in the technical justification, and the rationale is in all three places. So if I could speak to you as a young aspiring engineer, I would say begin early to develop these technical writing skills and learn how to organize your information in a way that's easy to read and easy to understand. And those are the three things that you need to get really good at in order to be a good technical writer. Learn how to state things clearly And one way you can practice this, as I mentioned, is by explaining board games and card games to people and lead out with the way you win the game is blank. And then think, what's the next question people are naturally going to have? If the way you win the game is having the lowest number of points, well, what makes me get points and how can I avoid getting points? And then you would explain that. And then there's going to be another question that follows. If I get points by having cards in my hand at the end of the turn, how do I get rid of cards from my hand? And so on and so forth. That's a good way to practice being clear. Then learn how to be concise. The best way to practice this is to go back to things that you've written and ask yourself the question, if I had to remove 80% of what I've written, what would I keep? What is the 20% that's the most important that really says my key idea? And then move that section to the beginning because it's the most important part and people start reading at the beginning and they're going to drop off throughout. And then look at that 80% of things that you would delete and figure out how much of this can I actually delete. You don't have to delete the full 80%, but probably would be good to delete some parts of it. That's good writing. It's learning how to remove things. And lastly, organization. With organization, it really just helps to understand what you're writing about in each section. So if you ever are writing something that's divided into subsections or different paragraphs, go back and ask yourself what sentence really belongs here, or take a sentence and say, which section does this really belong in? And really divide things out well and make those distinctions. So those are some ways that you can practice becoming a great technical writer. And as I said, it takes time, so be patient. And if you want an excellent opportunity to practice, I invite you to learn more about my one-on-one coaching program. And if you feel like you're not ready to commit to that, then I invite you to check out my free PDF workbook called Identify a Problem Worth Solving. And there will be a link in the description for that as well. You'll click on the link, put in your email, I will send it to you. And the purpose of this workbook is to help you get clear on what problem you would solve if you were to design a product. And it's a little bit of a commitment to go through. It's a step-by-step process, but it takes maybe 1 hour, maybe 2 hours to go through all the steps and get really clear on what problem you're passionate about solving. But take the time, sit down, and figure out what you really want and what you are passionate about. Trust me, if you have time on a weekend, this is going to make you feel a lot better than just scrolling on social media. Take this time to sit down, to put your phone away, to let things be quiet, and to really just think about, what do I want? What am I passionate about? It'll be awesome. It's a really good workbook. I put a lot of time and effort into it, and it's really great. So check that out. And thanks for listening today. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'm looking forward to chatting again with you soon.